The 56-year-long crisis of treasonous and illegitimate GOP presidents is happening again. And it is. Those of you who are longtime listeners to this program know this song. I will summarize it very briefly. Richard Nixon in 1968 committed treason by reaching out to South Vietnam and bribing, essentially, the president of South Vietnam, saying, I will make you rich if you refuse to go along with Lyndon Johnson's efforts to end the war in Vietnam, because Richard Nixon in 68 was running against Vice President Hubert Humphrey. And if the war was ended, Humphrey would have won. And there's no doubt about that. All the polls showed that. But with the war continuing, and by 68, it was insanely unpopular. And LBJ had actually negotiated peace. They were going to meet in Paris that fall and sign the deal. And Nixon blew it up just so that he could beat Hubert Humphrey, which he did. And he was never held to account for it. And we've got the audio tapes of Lyndon Johnson talking, President Johnson at the time, talking with Senate Majority Leader Everett Dirksen saying, or maybe Senate Minority Leader, whichever, saying this is treason. So number one, Nixon. Then after Nixon, of course, we had Jerry Ford. He was an illegitimate president because Nixon was an illegitimate president. And after Jerry Ford, you had Ronald Reagan cut a deal with the Ayatollah and to hold the hostages in Iran, and that deep-sixed or tanked Jimmy Carter's presidential aspirations. That was confirmed by the then president of Iran, Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, in the Christian Science Monitor and other venues. I recapped that. And then George Herbert Walker Bush, when the word was out, when in 1986 they got busted for the October surprise Iran-Contra, you know, for selling those weapons to Iran in exchange for holding the hostages. When they got busted for that, Lawrence Walsh, the prosecutor, the federal prosecutor, the special counsel, had subpoenaed George Herbert Walker Bush's, then President Bush's, diary of that time, which would have shown that he knew this was going on and he was part of it, and he could have gone to prison. And so his Attorney General, Bill Barr, said, oh, well, just pardon all of them, which he did on Christmas Day, or the Christmas Eve, actually, in 1992. And that was the end of that. So, you know, another, that and the Willie Horton ads, another illegitimate president. And then we get, you know, after Reagan, we get George W. Bush, who down in Florida, his brother throws 70,000, between 57,000 and 90,000. The numbers are still in dispute. At least 57,000 people off the voting rolls in Florida. And, you know, as a result of that, in theory, they were, you know, George W. Bush won the election by 537 votes, but there's a huge caveat. First off, in Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court stepped in because there was going to be a recount of all of the ballots in Georgia, in Florida in 2000. And this was ordered by the state Supreme Court. And had they recounted all of the ballots, they would have discovered this. I am quoting now from the New York Times, quote, while 35,176 voters wrote in Bush's name after punching the hole for him, 80,775 wrote in Gore's name while punching the hole for Gore. Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris decided that these were spoiled ballots because they were both punched and written upon, and ordered that none of them should be counted. Many were from African-American districts where older and often broken machines were distributed, causing voters to write onto their ballots so their intent would be unambiguous. So George W. Bush lost by 45,600 votes, but those 45,599 votes were not counted by Katherine Harris, right? And then, of course, the Supreme Court stopped the counting of the actual ballots, which would have discovered those 45,000. This was, they discovered them a year later. You know, and Scalia, in his Bush v. Gore decision, said, the counting of votes does, in my view, threaten irreparable harm to petitioner George W. Bush and to the country by casting a cloud upon what Bush claims to be the legitimacy of his election. So that was another stolen election, this time with good buddies well, Clarence Thomas was put on the court by George W. Bush's daddy, George Herbert Walker Bush. Excuse me. And then on top of that, George W. Bush told Mickey Herskowitz before he became before he was even a nominee for president in 2000, that if he became president, he was going to have a war with Iraq that would get him reelected in 2004. And sure enough, he did that, even though Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11, and absolutely nothing to do with al-Qaeda, absolutely nothing to do with, any of those guys. It was just, So Bush lies us into this war. And then you get Trump coming into office with the help of the Russians. You've got his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who had worked for the Russians, had taken millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars from the Russians, shoveling inside, campaign polling data off to Russian intelligence in 2016 so that they could micro-target 26 million Americans in 6 swing states to get the Electoral College vote for Donald Trump. And that's how he became president in 2016. And now Trump knows that Russia made him president in 2016 without that help, without the millions of dollars that Putin spent, and the literally over 120 million impressions created by the posts, the social media posts from the from the Internet Research Bureau, the Russian intelligence arm, pretending to be Americans, mostly on Facebook, but also on Twitter. Had it not happened, Trump would never become president. Trump knows that. And he wants Putin to do it again. And so now Trump is saying to Republicans, don't you dare send any aid to Ukraine, and don't you dare do anything about the southern border crisis, because I owe Putin, and I want to hand him Ukraine so that he'll help me out in this election, and I want to run on the border crisis, and so don't fix it. Wait for me. And Mitch McConnell now, just like he did with Merrick Garland's nomination, that was over 400 days that Mitch McConnell sat on that nomination. People say, well, Ukraine, the election is 11 months away. I mean, he can't hold out that long. Well, he did. He held out that long for the Supreme Court. So now Trump is trying to exacerbate this crisis on our southern border and screw Ukraine in a way that's going to lead to mass casualties and disrupt the international order, all to give Putin what he wants, the same way Nixon used Vietnam, Reagan used Iran, and Bush used Iraq just to win a damn election. We should not allow this to happen anymore. We have been badly treated, shall we say, by 6 Republican presidents, 5 illegitimate Republican presidents now. So call your members of Congress and tell them that, it's time for Congress to pass border security, aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel, get this done. It looks like it's coming out of the Senate. You've got people like Thom Tillis, who I'm no big fan of, but, the Republican senator from South Carolina, and Mitt Romney, the Republican senator from Utah, just coming right out and saying, this idea of Donald Trump's to kill this legislation just because he thinks it'll help him politically is wrong. It's not good for the nation. It's not good for Ukraine. It's not good for world peace, frankly. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the...
Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development. And why women have better sex than
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. It's the end of the week for us. I hope you're having a fine day. We have a special treat. It's just you and me all day, except that along with me is Greg Palast, the famous BBC Guardian reporter. And
I'm with you. Okay.
yeah, right here. You're going to be with us for the next 3 hours.
Okay.
So we're so happy to have Greg on, and we'll be taking calls throughout the program and just hanging out. So 877-37, excuse me, what's the number? 202-808-9925 is our phone number. And we got a couple of stories here that I wanted to share with you before we get started. But first off, Greg,
hey,
say hi. It's great having you in the studio.
Hello. I know it's rare. I even had my hat changed my hat for you.
Very good.
Very good.
Very good. Yeah,
Thank you.
your official reporter hat.
Yes.
And
so I'm an investigative reporter because I wear this hat.
there you go. I like it. I like it a lot.
I'll get you a hat, then you can be an investigative reporter too. That's all you need,
Yeah, I've heard rumors, but
you borrow a pen,
yeah.
and you have a little notebook, and
there you
you're
go.
set.
We're off to the races. Yeah. So let me lay out a couple stories here
Okay.
and get this under our belt, and then we can I want to talk with you also about the latest work that you're doing and,
Yes.
and the stuff that's going on in Georgia too.
Yeah. Oh boy.
In fact, why don't we just start there? You and I were talking yesterday. Greg is staying with us for a couple of days on his way to Portugal, and
That was a secret. Well, it's out now.
Oh, it
okay,
was?
no, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, okay, good.
It's a big place. They won't find me.
Yeah, there you go. We were talking about how Trump could win the election.
Yeah, I mean,
And this is not fun stuff.
I know.
This is-
In 2016, I made a film called "The Best Democracy Money Can Buy." It was how Trump was going to steal the election. I know we're not allowed to use that term. Was going to win the election by using vote suppression techniques to stop black people from voting.
Right.
2016, absolutely no one thought Trump would win. You had MSNBC talking about no way to 270 electoral votes for Donald Trump. No way. But in fact, there was a way. If you stop people of color from voting, and that they did on a mass basis. They used a system at that time called cross-check, where they said, if you vote in 2 states, well, guess who they say votes in 2 states? People named Jose Lopez, David Fernandez, et cetera. So you kind of get it.
Jesse Jackson.
Jesse Jackson, Joe Johnson. Those are people. Oh, Joe Johnson voted in Michigan. Now he's trying to vote in Georgia. They stopped him.
Joe Washington.
So it was about 1.1 million votes. I'm not kidding. We actually counted them up. About 1.1 million voters, almost exclusively voters of color, were blocked from voting or having their votes counted.
In how many states?
And that was in 30 states.
Mm-hmm. Republican
states.
Republican
This was created
states.
by, if you remember, a guy named Chris Kobach. He was Donald Trump's hitman. He was the vote fraud hunter for Donald Trump, and he was put in charge of a commission to hunt down vote fraud after Trump was elected, et cetera. The ACLU, working with us, with the Palast investigative team, got that system overturned. Mm-hmm. But that was after the inauguration. So in 2016, I said, he's going to win this. This is how he gets to 270. Now, in 2024, we're facing the same thing. And that's why Trump is meeting with Mike Johnson. They're talking about using systems that were especially, I've concentrated on the state of Georgia. I did a film called Vigilante back in 2022, actually, which said, look, they're using these systems, they're trying them out in Georgia to block black voters, especially voters of color, from voting. And in that case, they used first a mass purge by a governor, by a secretary of state. These are the people, if you don't know who your secretary of state are, you better, because they're the people that determine the voter rolls. So a guy named Brian Kemp was secretary of state. He eliminated 340,144 voters, saying they didn't live in the state. Every one of them lived in the state, was a legal voter. I know because I got your guys down the street here from Microsoft and Amazon to go through their experts on where you live. They don't deliver the wrong panties to the wrong address. They said these are legal voters where they are registered to vote, but they're overwhelmingly voters of color, including Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin. I was at the polling station when her granddaughter was in tears that she'd been thrown out. It was a storm. She was literally thrown out in the rain with her walker. Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin was denied the right to vote among 1/3 That elected Brian Kemp, but it also allowed for Trump to take the state in 2016 because Georgia is actually a blue state if you let people vote. But the tricks they tried there, now they've got a new system. This film Vigilante we made. We're not the state, because I went to federal court with Black Voters Matter Fund in our film, and we got, again, these systems overturned once again. But it's like whack-a-mole. They come up with something new. The new one is Vigilante Challenges. This is what they're going to be talking about at Mar-a-Lago today, that this group, True the Vote, is the principal group. They're recruiting hundreds of thousands of people to challenge you on election day. These are not government officials. These are like self-appointed vote fraud hunters, and they can say, you shouldn't be allowed to vote. And so in the film Vigilante, which I did 2 years ago, we had one woman that I confronted, one GOP official, 80 GOP officials, all Republicans. I'm not being partisan, Tom. I'm nonpartisan. But I can't make this up. It was all Republican officials. 80 Republican officials challenged 200,000 voters.
Whoa.
200,000 voters. And one woman, for example, her name is Pam Reardon. She's a GOP official. She works with Marjorie Taylor Greene. She personally challenged 32,000 people. She got the list from this right-wing group, True the Vote. She literally handed in a thumb drive to the county and said, stop these people from voting. We had another guy who dressed up like, and then I confronted her, by the way. I said, have you met these people? I showed her pictures of her neighbors that she had challenged, her black neighbors whose votes she had challenged. Do you ever talk to them? Did you see if they really lived? She said they didn't live in Georgia. I said, they're right down the street. Here's their picture. You want to talk to them? I put them on the phone. She was armed, and she chased me out of her house. Heavily armed.
With a gun.
Yeah, well, she won that argument.
Yeah. Well, apropos of that.
And then now it's going national, and this is how Trump can win. This vigilante business has spread mainly to the 7 swing states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Texas too, which is important to them. Yeah. Texas is a blue state if people get to vote. I was just there investigating. So they've widened this business where people are challenging, one person challenging thousands of voters that they've never met, and that prevents them from having their vote counted. And that's how Trump can take this, because look at those numbers. If you challenge 200,000 voters in Georgia, which Trump only lost by only 11,000 votes officially. If you challenge 100,000 voters in Arizona, which Trump only lost by 14,000 votes. If you challenge, 150,000 voters in Wisconsin, these are real numbers, 135,000 voters in Wisconsin. Trump only lost that by 10,000. So basically, this new vigilante challenge business is the center of their new action, because they haven't been able to stop that yet.
Now, I had somebody called into the show, I believe it was last week, might have been earlier this week, and said that they had been in Washington, D.C. at one of the big hotels, and there was this convention of thousands and thousands of guys who looked like bikers or militia guys. You know, they were wearing camo, they were covered with tattoos, they had long hair or shaved heads. You know, and all the paraphernalia of the militia stuff.
Yeah. The militia.
And they were doing some kind of training.
Yes.
So what is this training? Are they going to show
actually
up
one
at the
of our
polls?
guys got inside and took the training too. Zach
tell me about
Roberts, who are one of our undercover guys who specializes in going inside right-wing groups. And what they're doing is that they are training people to challenge. They say, well, they won't challenge Thom Hartmann, but they'll challenge Joe Johnson, who has dark skin, and say that guy doesn't live here.
Right.
Plus, it gets intimidating. Those guys are violent. In fact, some of them, when I was in Arizona, I was just in Arizona covering a Kerry Lake event, you know, the Republican candidate for Senate. And the Hispanic groups are saying that they have now 50 groups of flying elections protectors, because you have these guys with guns standing next to the drop boxes, asking people for their citizenship papers, especially in Arizona.
Because
if someone's
open carry is
Hispanic,
legal.
yeah, like, are you? Yeah, open carry is legal. So they literally stand next to these drop boxes. So people walk away. They're scared. Would you? You know, whether you're, you know, and by the way, it's very important for people to know. They keep saying that not only do people not live where they live, but you have a lot of foreigners voting. This is another thing that.
Well, that's going to be the essence of the press conference at Mar-a-Lago this
Yes.
morning, is they're going to introduce legislation to make it illegal for foreigners to vote, which has been illegal forever.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's just complete BS.
Yeah. So, you know, in Arizona, I went to meet with Russell Pierce, State Senator Russell Pierce. He's the guy who started this whole business a few years ago, saying millions of
this was
voters.
SB 1020, wasn't it? Show me your papers, please.
Yes, show me your papers. You know, it was basically the driving while black law, but it affected voting. It started with voting. He said 5 million Mexicans had crossed the border to vote for Democrats. 5 million. So I went to him and I said, okay, forget the 5 million. Give me 5 names. Let's go arrest them. Let's find these people. I can go, you know, I'm an investigator. I can go, let's get them. You said that there are 5 million. Just give me 5 names. He couldn't give me 5 names.
Right.
Do you know that Arizona has never, ever, despite being on the border, has not arrested any foreigner for trying to vote in U.S. elections? By the way, if you're sneaking across the border, the last thing you want to do is hand in your name and address to vote.
Right. Right, where you might get arrested.
Yeah. I think you'd be in serious trouble. So what's happened is they literally don't have a single case. They say millions, but they don't have. It's actually quite easy to find such people. They don't exist.
Yeah, they don't exist. They never existed, but Republicans have been using this since the 80s. Well, since the 60s. This was Operation Eagle Eye with William Rehnquist in Arizona.
Yes.
You know, there's a big bear of a guy, 270 pounds, standing outside these voting places saying, or maybe 230, saying, you know, you don't look like you live here. And people would just turn and run, you know.
Of course.
It's amazing. We'll be right back with Greg Palast, and we'll be picking up your calls.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So stay tuned, 18 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Let's pick up some calls here, Greg, and you know, feel free to chime in, or we'll try to do this together here. Stuart in Los Angeles. Hey, Stuart, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hi,
Stuart.
Greg.
Hey.
Hey, first thing I have to say is I really appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you.
Wow, thanks.
And are doing. I have a lot of reaction with this whole, excuse me. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
With the whole voter suppression thing, but my main focus right now is, and I'm sorry to bring this up again because I know you get a lot of calls about this, Tom, but it's the Medicare Advantage, because something just came up for the first time for me, and I'm wondering if you're aware of it. Now, I get the mailers from these different companies about the Medicare Advantage, and it always looks real impressive. But now I'm getting a mailer recently from Medicare, which is a normal mailer where they just update, excuse me, some of the activity, And at the bottom of it, they give the Medicare phone number, and then they give another number. And it says here, contact your state health insurance program for free local health insurance counseling. I called it.
Oh, my God. You keep going. You called it. I'll bet they gave you a Medicare Advantage sales pitch, right?
Right. I talked to someone. She screened me, and she said someone will be calling you. And someone called me, and yeah, it was a hard push. But I'm really surprised. This is really draining Medicare, right?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It cost Medicare $140 billion last year.
Yeah. So I don't understand. Oh, another thing is the Medicare booklet that I get. I guess it's every year.
Yeah.
It has a section for Medicare Advantage.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's unconscionable. This was all built into the law in 2000. What was it? 2003, I think, when George W. Bush passed the Medicare Reform Act that created Medicare Advantage in its current incarnation, Medicare Part
when he
C.
was on his way to trying to privatize Social Security too.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this was step one. That was going to be step two.
Yep. Absolutely. And thank you for jumping in like that. That's how we need to do it.
Well, I just had to remind you of the horror show in case you forgot.
Indeed. So
yeah, I did want to ask Greg what he thought of all this, and I'm glad he jumped in too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Stuart, thank you. Forewarned is forearmed, I guess. We just need to spread the word as far and wide as possible. The Medicare Advantage is a scam, and it's being used to privatize Medicare, and this was Bush and the Republicans' plan. Stuart, thank you for the call.
Yeah, and so now I'm getting calls.
Oh, geez. Yeah, because they've sold your number. Yep. That's
they got all my information, and then it's come to this.
I would suggest that you call your member of Congress and complain about it, and that you also call Congressman Ro Khanna's office, because he's a California congressman.
Now, here's something I don't understand. You tell us to call these guys, but also they're getting paid off by, you know who?
Yeah, by Medicare. Or by Medicare Advantage,
well,
I mean.
Medicare and the oligarchs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it doesn't mean that we stop. We have to persist.
And there are some honest people who've been elected.
That's true. That's true. You know about 100 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
They really aren't.
There you go. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. And welcome back. So, Greg Palast still with us. I just want to wrap up this story about what you're doing, the work that you're doing right now, the research that you're doing, what you're discovering, because it sure sounds to me like, you pointed out how suppressing the vote of how many people in 2016 allowed
1.1 million in 2016,
and that's what put
I put it in Rolling Stone and I put it in BBC and on the air around the country, but the mainstream had a tough time covering it, and we couldn't warn enough people to get re-registered. So 1.1 million people in 2016, but now it's these vigilantes. We actually had one guy who dressed like a vigilante. He dresses like Doc Holliday. He's a vice chairman of the Republican Party in Georgia, And he challenged thousands of voters, including Major General Gamaliel Turner. Now, this guy is America's expert on warfare of the future, by the way. He's career military. He was assigned after the Russia invaded Ukraine to California, because he was assigned by the President of the United States to a military base in California. His vote was taken away in Georgia because he doesn't live in Georgia anymore, by this vigilante. The problem is,
but you can vote in your home state when you're
well,
you're
believe it or
military.
not, if you're sent off to Germany or Afghanistan, you don't lose your vote if you're a soldier.
Right.
You know, you're not supposed to. But anyway,
unless you're black and the vigilantes come
But in Trump land, you're no longer a legal voter. They've got you, and then you get a chance to go to fly. The state of Georgia told the Major General he could leave his base, go AWOL, fly to Georgia, personally appear at his county office to prove that he's an American citizen, the Major General, and then he could vote.
Now,
but this is literally thousands of voters.
The reason that they're using these civilian vigilantes,
Mm-hmm.
my understanding, is because there have been enough court cases, Mark Elias and people like this, saying
Yes.
officials can't do this anymore in some states.
That's right.
But,
so we've been able to win.
Citizens can't.
Yes, with Mark Elias and others. I've actually been in federal court with Black Voters Matter and the ACLU, and we've got a lot of these things overturned. What happens is that the states under federal law cannot start removing people within a month or two of the election. But individual vigilantes, they can stop you the day before the election.
And
so
it's
the
too late to
GOP
re-register.
Yeah.
You're outside the window.
Yeah, you got to go in physically and have a court-like hearing to get your vote counted.
Which nobody's going to do. Yeah, amazing.
We'll
We'll continue the conversation on the other side of this break, and we're going to be picking up your phone calls. You can talk to both me and Greg, the great Greg Palast. GregPalast.com is his website. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We'll be right back.
Today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric L. Alexander. The subtitle is How 22 Million Government Workers Will Save Our Republic. This is from Chapter 1, Civil Servants and Servant Leaders. Unelected public servants are found at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. But the modern model for all is found in the federal employment systems. More specifically, it is in the concept and operation of the federal civil service system, which governs the appointment and tenure of most federal workers. Those who believe that the unelected federal bureaucracy is a deep state covertly dedicated to the overthrow of elected government see the civil service as a fundamentally unconstitutional innovation, a monster of very recent creation. Such demonizing mythology aside, the truth is that the origin of the unelected government is found in the Constitution, under Section 2 of Article 2. The article defines the powers of the executive branch, and the second paragraph of its Section 2 assigns to the President the power to, quote, nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law, end quote. Thus, the President has the power to make all appointments not otherwise provided for in the Constitution. These are subject to the Senate's advice and consent unless Congress, by law, vests the appointment of such inferior officers as they may think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments, end quote. In other words, the unelected government, which I have called the fourth branch, is rooted in the Constitution through the powers that it grants either to the President or to Congress. In turn, Congress may grant the President, the courts, or heads of departments the power to hire unelected public servants. In all cases, however, the creation of the unelected government flows from the Constitution, the supreme authority and originating law of the nation. The framers of the Constitution recognized that the elected government of our republic was not in itself sufficient to govern us. It cannot alone get government done. It does not alone possess all the expertise necessary to lead, let alone manage, so vast an enterprise as a nation. If this was true in the late 18th century, it's even truer in the 21st century geopolitical and technological environment that is far more complex, and that therefore requires a cadre of professionals possessing a wide variety of specialized skills, training, education, and experience. The Constitution does not call these appointments and hires a fourth branch, but that is what the federal service and other government workers constitute. De jure, in law, there is no fourth branch of U.S. government, yet it unquestionably exists de facto, in practice, in reality, in fact. Does the fourth branch compete with the three constitutionally established branches? No. It coexists with them, as provided for in Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution itself. Those three constitutional branches are absolutely necessary to our republic, but they are not sufficient to it, as the framers acknowledged. Moreover, as I've already observed, for most people, most of the time, and in most situations, it is the member of the fourth branch who are, practically speaking, the government. They are the doers. They implement the policies created and interpreted by the three constitutional branches. What is more, although they do not decide or decree policy, they often influence it, not covertly, but by intention and design. The Constitution assigns the Senate the roles of advising on and consenting to most major presidential appointments, but members of the fourth branch do far more advising on a daily basis when it comes to providing the subject matter expertise and feedback necessary to formulate and modify policy decisions. As it turned out, following the coming into effect of the Constitution in 1789, the President, the Chief Executive, that is, the elected official responsible for faithfully executing the laws, directly or indirectly appointed the unelected personnel whom he deemed necessary to execute government. Most of the agencies in which personnel of the unelected government served were created by the executive branch under Article 2. And for a full 170 years after the Constitution was ratified, the President had the unquestioned authority to appoint and to terminate what were, in effect, employees of his branch, the executive branch. Indeed, in 1789, Congress explicitly voted, by a narrow margin, that it had no authority of approval or disapproval of presidential decisions to terminate appointees. Only those few public positions that were independent of the executive branch, which today are known as independent agencies, were not subject to presidential appointment or termination. In 1829, Andrew Jackson took office as the 7th President of the United States. He was regarded as the apostle of the rights of the common man, and he made it clear that he intended to usher in an area of a more highly participatory democracy. During his 2 terms and under his influence, many states substantially extended the still males-only franchise by dropping property requirements from the ballot, and Johnson waged a mighty battle against the Second Bank of the United States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program with Greg Palast today for the whole 3 hours of Anything Goes Friday, whatever's on your mind. And Greg, shall we take some calls?
Yep, and we'll go where you want to go.
There you go. Denise in Folsom, California. Denise, you're on the air. What's up?
Good morning, gentlemen. It's so nice to have the honor of talking to 2 young, handsome gentlemen this morning.
Bless you.
I made your Friday.
Are you single?
No, I'm happily married. But my question to you, or I need some education on this. Tom, you said a while ago that fossil fuel, we're going to start seeing it go up. And here in Folsom, California, we're at $5.45 a gallon right now. It's like the page turned, and all of a sudden it was just like, whoa. Go to other counties around here, and we're at $5.65, $5.11. It's all over the board. Some of it's over $6 a gallon. If United States is producing more fossil fuel than we ever have before, than any other countries right now, my question to you is, why are we depending on overseas or foreign oil? Because when I explain this to my friends and we talk about this, we have a big question mark. If we're producing so much, why are we not using our own and depending on other areas?
I have an answer for you, and I don't know if you want to.
No, go ahead.
Okay. In 1973, if my recollection is correct, it might have been 74, but I'm pretty sure it was 73, when the Arab countries cut off oil to the United States because we were supporting Israel. And the price of gas doubled and tripled, and we had these alternate days that you could buy gas depending on whether your number on your license plate was odd or even and all that. When that happened, Richard Nixon passed a law or signed a law that said that it was illegal to export raw crude oil out of the United States. Just period. It was illegal. All the crude produced in the United States would stay in the United States. In 2000, I'd have to go back and look at the exact year. It was during the Obama presidency. Congress passed a law saying, hey, we've got plenty of oil now. In fact, we were producing enough to meet all our own needs. So let's let these oil companies export oil and make some money, because they can sell it. The most expensive oil produced in the world is the Bakken crude. It's called sweet crude. It's really high quality oil. So let's sell this stuff to foreign countries and help these oil companies make some money. So the problem right now is that some percentage, I don't know what it is, my guess would be probably between 20 and 30% of U.S. produced oil is going overseas, which means that we have to import oil to make up for it. And thus, when Saudi Arabia and Russia cut their oil production back, 2 months ago was when I wrote the op-ed about this and came on this program and said, by the time the election happens, you're going to see $6 and $7 a gallon gasoline. This is a plan by Mohammed bin Salman, who desperately wants Donald Trump back in the White House, and Vladimir Putin, who desperately wants Donald Trump back in the White House. Screw Joe Biden. And they're able to do it because it's not illegal any longer to export domestic oil.
Yes.
So how are we going to fix it, though? Because this is going to be a big issue.
It's going to be huge. You want to add something, Greg?
Well, yeah, actually, a bit of history. I know you like history, Tom, and it's worth knowing, is that when the Alaska pipeline, when they're pulling gas and oil from the north shore of Alaska, the excuse was, we have to be energy independent. We can't import gas anywhere, so we need this to get the oil out of Alaska and destroy Alaska and ship it by ship and not by pipeline, which Sierra Club had suggested. So we ended up with the Exxon Valdez disaster. But you know why? They never wanted to do that. They wanted to actually take the gas, the oil, and ship it to Japan, which is right there. If you look at a globe, and don't, stop looking at globes sideways, turn it on its head, and you'll see that Japan is very close to Alaska. And then the African-American congresswoman from Compton said, well, if you really talk about energy independence, let's say you can't take Alaskan oil anywhere but the United States. So it all came into her district in Compton, where they have an oil port. So she called Nixon's bluff on this.
Oh, and this is in the 70s.
Yes, in the late, at the beginning of '69, and said that that Alaskan crude has to go to the United States, and then later they slipped out of that. Right. So that's part of the story. Is that originally all Alaskan crude, which is our biggest source of oil at the time, was supposed to stay in the United States.
Yeah, that was before fracking. Before we started fracking oil from all over the country. So, Denise, we answer your question?
Hopefully.
You did, but can you explain it to me as I am a fifth grader?
Okay.
Yeah, it's
so I can come back really quick.
The bottom line is that the oil companies paid off enough members of Congress, basically bribed enough members of Congress legally because of Citizens United, because of the Supreme Court and Clarence Thomas and and the billionaires who own Clarence Thomas to change the law so that they could export oil produced in the United States, producing a shortage here in the United States, throwing us back into a situation where we're dependent on imports from Saudi Arabia and Russia. And we're actually importing 300,000 barrels of oil a day from Russia, right?
From Russia. And you know what, Tom, there's one thing: we could drop the price of gasoline tomorrow if we would say, okay, that the biggest reserves of oil on the planet are in Venezuela. And so we've had an embargo on oil coming in from Venezuela, not from the Saudi Arabians, right? They said, oh, well, because Venezuela is not a real democracy versus Saudi Arabia versus Qatar versus Russia.
Which are openly
and so,
dictatorships.
Yes, I have, even though I'm actually a personal friend of the current president, but he's become a totalitarian jerk. I will admit it. Yeah. I will say it. But would I rather have from a guy who kind of fixed an election to a guy who is to a monster like Putin? So why are we not bringing Venezuelan oil? Because Trump embargoed that oil, and of course the pressure's been on Biden not to release it. He's tried to work a deal with Chevron to bring in. He could bring in a couple million barrels of oil a day, which would slam down the price of gasoline here. Biden's tried to do that.
But the Republicans will scream that he's a communist as soon as he does that.
Yeah, right. So they have blocked him, and we know why they're blocking him. It's cynical.
Yeah.
They know that if they bring in this oil, the price of gasoline goes down, and they're running on the high price of gasoline. So it has nothing to do with Venezuela. It has everything to do with literally trying to fix an election through scaring people with high prices of gasoline when the gasoline's right there.
Right, and that's why inflation, Denise, that's why inflation just went up this week, which drove down the stock market because of the price of gas. So, Denise, I'm going to move along, but thank you for the call. That was great.
Wasn't that a great question for you, gentlemen?
It was perfect. Thank you so much, Denise. Have a great morning. Okay, bye-bye. Joe in Cupertino. Hey, Joe, you're on the air with Greg and me. What's up?
Tom, I wanted to thank you so much for your apple cider vinegar comment last week. It has been a miracle. I started using it, and my symptoms have dissipated. I am so grateful for you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I wanted to point out to Mr. Palast about the election that we just had here and where I live. It was a tie for second place. It was two counties, and they were voting for a congressional district in Iskow's position. The two candidates that finished second and third tied. So it works. I think it's really great that it works. I mean, then you think about this big city that I live in, and it comes down to the single vote. And so every vote counts. It's just amazing to me. My comment is, today I got a check for $10,000 at the IRS. I'm on Social Security. I have to pay 85% of my benefits back to the government. They took it away from me before I paid taxes on it, and now that I'm able to collect on it, I have to pay it back. I think that this is terrible. I know Ro's been supportive of this. If you earned it, you keep it type of legislation. But if I'm not mistaken, it was President Reagan who made me pay more in Social Security taxes.
That's right.
So keep
1983 when he, or 86, I forget which year, but yeah.
So now I'm paying back. I mean, that's almost like a lose-lose situation. It's terrible. And I'm complaining because I'm so fortunate that I have to pay income taxes. But many people have to live off of their Social Security. And how can you do this to people? It's almost like double dipping.
Yeah. Well, that was, this was Ronald Reagan's great innovation, Joe, and thank you for the call. I don't know why Reagan taxed Social Security income. It wasn't like, when he came into office, the federal budget deficit was only $800 billion. We hadn't even hit $1 trillion. We've been steadily paying down the federal budget deficit ever since World War II. We came out of World War II as 127% of GDP, which is where it is right now. And we paid it all almost down to nothing, $800 billion. And then Reagan says, we're going to give a tax cut to the billionaires, and we're going to make up that revenue by taxing Social Security benefits from seniors. This is nuts.
Well, it was the beginning of the end. The idea was to undo the New Deal.
Yeah.
That was the whole game. And, you had these big corporations and General Electric and others creating the situation. I was a student of Milton Friedman, the great free market nutcase. That's where I got my degree in economics. And he was saying, we have to get rid of Social Security. So what you do is you start taking it back.
Away at it.
So you're now taxed, as your caller said, for 85 up to a certain age. For 85% of your Social Security is now taxable. and that was under Reagan. But it was the beginning of removing it and then obviously trying to ultimately privatize it and eliminate it.
Right, and turn it over to the big banks in New York because they're the ones who make contributions to the GOP. And a few Democrats. I mean, you know, there were probably a few Democrats in on
More than a
this
few,
as well.
unfortunately.
Yeah, sadly. George in Portland, Oregon, you're on the air with Thom and Greg. What's up?
Hey guys, I've been wanting to call all week with this state question to get your opinion on this, Thom. And I can't believe my luck that Greg is here with us. I think that Democrats need to start using those same laws and purging Republican voters, every rural white voter from all the swing states. Just start fighting fire with fire.
I completely agree,
George. Show them that, you know.
Okay. Yeah, I got to stop you there, buddy.
Well, you know, I think the outrage, the blowback that it would produce might bring down the entire little empire of theirs. Thank you, George.
Yeah, thank you. I work with Black Voters Matter Fund and NAACP and ACLU and, all these great groups and lawyers. Mm-hmm. And we're always asked the same question. If they illegally in Georgia remove 340,134. I'm giving you the exact number because I went through these names. And we literally paid to go through name by name. 1/3 voters. Well, then, why doesn't the ACLU, why don't Black Voters Matter challenge 300,000, rednecks?
Right.
And the answer is, when I ask, and they say, because when this has happened to you, when you walk in and told you can't vote, they said, we want that to happen to no one, no matter what their politics.
So they're being noble.
They're being noble because
God bless them.
They just, and I understand, look.
It's time. It's time to fight fire with fire.
I know what you're saying, but they can't imagine that anyone should go through being told
maybe you and I should start a vigilante group. Start doing some trainings in Washington, D.C.
These people are scary enough. I faced their guns, literally. Their guns. And I'm just not...
Yeah.
I don't want to start putting on my own six-shooters.
I get it. All righty. We'll be right back in just a moment. It's 47 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann and Greg Palast with you here for Anything Goes Friday. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
How's my sound?
Talk media for the sane among us. We'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. Holly in Washington, D.C. Hey, Holly, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
My pleasure. I'm glad the prior caller fangirled for me, so I didn't have to gush all over you guys. You two are 4 years, and together I don't know, there's a sparkle there. And I feel like I won the lottery. So, Thom, I've called in 3 times on this one post you did about the another way for the Republicans to steal an election, not getting to 270 electoral college votes and it going back to Congress. Mm-hmm. Greg, have you looked into that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, absolutely. We've got a problem in our Constitution called the 12th Amendment and all the Article 2. And this goes way back. I won't go into the whole history of it, but we have a problem that if there is a dispute over the electoral votes, that if the dispute continues and isn't resolved, then Congress will vote for the president, determine who will be president, instead of the Electoral College, which already is a problem, as we well know. It's because it's not, democratic, but it's close to democracy. But in this case, are you ready for this? Each state gets one vote.
Right, and there's 26 Republican-controlled states and 23 Democratic.
So that California gets a vote.
God.
And North Dakota gets a vote.
Yep.
And South Dakota gets a vote.
Wyoming, Oklahoma.
And so basically, about 75% of Americans are then disenfranchised, and you have all the Republican small states pick our president for us. And that's in the 12th Amendment. We got a problem. And so this has been a problem. We've also had some other laws. We did have a disputed election after the Civil War.
Yeah, in 1876.
1876, of course. I was waiting for Tom to come in with the date. Of course, 1876, where we had a Mike Pence situation where it's in my film Vigilante, by the way, where there was a fight over electoral votes. The Democrat had won. Tilden had won.
Right.
You look at the popular vote, and he won the electoral vote.
Won vote.
But they
that's
challenged. They took away an elector in Oregon here, saying that he'd been like a postal. They just challenged the elector. It was just like the last election. They challenged electoral votes, and then it went to a commission, and
it was created by Congress.
And just by so in the end, the Republican who was backed on a deal that he cut with the Democrats of the South, the Ku Klux Klan. It was literally, I have a cartoon showing a handshake between the Republican industrialists of the North and the Klan's members in their white sheets, I kid you not, shaking hands on the deal to elect the president who lost the Electoral College, lost the popular vote, and they used this game.
And he then destroyed Reconstruction.
Right. So what happened is that they ended Reconstruction. That was the beginning of Ku Klux Klan, controlled Jim Crow, black laws as they called them, then became Jim Crow laws. And it literally, so in the end, the South ended up winning the Civil War and controlling things. They had to give up their slaves. Then they became, virtual servants on the land, so they had to rent slaves instead of buying them. This is what happens. It's a danger, and that's why every vote counts. Check your registration, and then check your registration again, please.
Amen. Yeah. Greg, thank you. Holly, thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry we're out of time, but it's 51 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program with Greg Palast. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Back in 2010, when Viktor Orban took over the Fidesz party in Hungary, that party was sort of like the Republican Party. It was just a conventional conservative European political party. And he has turned it into a neo-fascist powerhouse. He pushed through he altered the nation's constitution to push through what we would call gerrymandering and voter suppression so that his party will always win. He campaigned on building a wall. Build a wall was literally one of his campaign slogans, and he did build a wall across the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees who were fleeing the violence when Russia was bombing that country. His other two campaign slogans were, and I quote, "Restore Christian purity and make Hungary great again." Seriously, back in 2010, 6 years before Trump. There's an amazing backstory about how Viktor Orban is being cloned, essentially, in the GOP. You can find the article over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Okay, we're back. And welcome back. 53 minutes past the hour. Let's see who's up next. David in Woodland Hills. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm not going to say you guys are handsome, but you are kind of cute. That's as far as I'm willing to go.
Bless you, David.
Thank you. If I may give you a side note and then the quick reason I called you on Tuesday. The phone was breaking up so badly we had to end the call. I called you from my landline, and I called back. The ringer was so bad I just hung up, and I made a local call. It was perfectly fine. The point is, Mercury is retrograde, trouble with transportation and communication, so be careful crossing the street, driving your car, back up your computer. On Monday, Stephanie Miller said the media is woefully underprepared for today's moment, and I could not disagree more. The media is totally prepared for today's moment by the opposition, the oligarchic owners of the media, and finally their highly effective alternative facts rhetoric is to the truth what Donald Trump's delaying tactics are to the law.
Yeah, Greg, when in 2000, thank you, David, for that. Greg, in 2000, when you were working for the BBC and you exposed the fact that George W. Bush only won that election by 537 votes.
537 votes.
Yeah. The only reason he won by 537 votes was because just 6 months earlier or thereabouts, Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush had purged 90,000 people, mostly black people.
Yes,
in
94,000. Okay, so Tom.
But
let
me finish.
Important. Yeah, go ahead.
I know, but let me just finish where I was going with this. You guys published this. BBC put it out. They had a deal with ABC to publish this in the United States, and ABC said no. So,
that's right. So what happened was...
We just have a minute and a half here.
So what happened was back in 2000, Bush won the election by just 537 votes in Florida. But what I had uncovered is that months before, that Jeb Bush, his brother had gotten his Secretary of State to remove 94,000 people, almost all of them black. I'm not guessing because it says BLA right next to their name, BLA, when they removed these people. And that gave him the votes. They said these black people were all felons. You know what? There was not zero illegal felon voter on the Florida voter rolls. Not one. No one was prosecuted, nothing. But they took out 94,000 people that elected Jeb Bush. But the main thing is the U.S. media would not touch the story. I got Paul Krugman to put in the New York Times. Bless the man. He went into his column. Why is it an opinion column? Was election, our democracy was literally swiped away from us, and we couldn't get it covered.
And can you imagine if Al Gore had become president, we would have done something about climate change, we wouldn't have invaded Iraq, we would have, a rational Supreme Court. I mean, it's just mind-boggling,
And it's continuing, and they're still not covering this story.
Yeah, the story of
vote suppression, racial vote suppression in America. And sometimes they'll even cover story, like you'll see in the New York Times, the Washington Post, vote suppression tactics in Georgia or somewhere else. The problem is, after the elections, they never say, this is what elected this Republican.
Right.
That's a problem.
Yeah, it really is, and it's ongoing, and there's just like no discussion about it. The Supreme Court legalized it for Ohio. Remember when Husted got sued and it went to the Supreme Court?
They legalized it, and we just had some more court opinions saying these games are just A-OK.
We'll be back with more of your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen, and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskenson Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents, rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome, Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of Anything Goes Friday here. Thom Hartmann and Greg Palast with you. And the big money, this is from The Guardian. Your name is on their masthead.
Yes, I admit it. I'm on the Guardian masthead. So I'm in journalistic exile.
There you go. There you go. The headline, Billionaire Leonard Leo rejects Senate subpoena over Supreme Court gifts. I'll just share a couple of paragraphs here with you, and then I'd love to get your take on this, Greg. Okay. The big money right-wing donor Leonard Leo said he would not comply with a subpoena issued by the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. By the way, longtime listeners of Program know that I've been ragging on Dick Durbin, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, to do this, and he did it. He finally did it. God bless you, Dick Durbin. All the people who called him and asked him to do it, please call him again and thank him. And now tell him to enforce the subpoena. So anyhow, back to the article from The Guardian. This is by Martin Pengelly. Referring to Dick Durbin, the Illinois Democrat who chairs the committee, Leonard Leo said, quote, "I am not capitulating to his lawless support of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse," that's the Rhode Island Democrat, and who's been on this program many times, "and the left's dark money effort to silence and cancel political opposition." In November, the Senate committee voted on party lines to subpoena Leo and the Texas billionaire Harlan Crow, a collector of Hitler memorabilia with close links to Clarence Thomas. On Thursday, more than 4 months later, Leo said he had received a subpoena, but a spokesperson for Crow said he did not. No doubt his servant who answers the door forgot to hand it to him. In a statement to the Washington Post, Durbin said, quote, now this is Dick Durbin, Senator Durbin of Illinois. "Since July 2023, Leonard Leo has responded to the legitimate oversight requests of the Senate Judiciary Committee with a blanket refusal to cooperate. His outright defiance left the committee with no other choice but to move forward with compulsory process. For that reason, I have issued a subpoena to Mr. Leo. Mr. Leo has played a central role in the ethics crisis plaguing the Supreme Court. This subpoena is a direct result of Mr. Leo's own actions and choices." They go on to say, Caroline Ciconi, president of Accountable U.S., which is focused on drawing attention to Leo's coordination of billions of dollars in right-wing political spending, said, quote, "Thanks to Leo, a full-blown corruption crisis has plagued the High Court for over a year, undermining its credibility. Today's subpoena is a crucial step toward accountability." You know, quack, quack, quack. It goes on from there. So what say you, Greg?
Well, first, let's remind people who Leonard Leo is.
Good idea.
And he is the head of... He is the nominal head, I want to make that point, of the Federalist Society. Of our 9 Supreme Court justices, 5 now come out of the Federalist Society. All of them, including, Amy Covid Barrett, the whole crew, all came out of the Federalist Society, including Chief Justice John Roberts. All 5. So the Supreme Court...
Which one of the right-wingers didn't?
No, they're all...
Because there's 6 right-wingers on the court now.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was, I can't remember which of the 5 right offhand. You'll watch my next film, which is coming up.
I'll do that.
So exactly. So in fact, we're doing a story on, I'm doing another film besides the Vigilante I talked about in the last hour, on the Brothers Koch with George and Leonardo DiCaprio are producing this. And you have to understand how the Federalist Society was funded. They talk about handling billions of dollars. So who are these money and what do they do? Okay. This came out of the Koch brothers. Back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were nothing oil men until they got a contract with the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs to take oil from Indian land. They stole $2.4 billion worth of oil from the Osage Indians. $2.4 billion. These are some of the poorest people.
Really
and now when I use
word.
the term stole, so listen to this. The FBI put 50 people on, headed by famous agent Jim Elroy. I just spoke with him yesterday. He has the film of them stealing the oil. I spoke to the special prosecutor of the case who said he had Charles Koch's confession. I got the secret confession, by the way. I've seen it. I've read Charles Koch's confession about stealing oil, taking the oil that wasn't his. How did he not go to jail? There was a grand jury. There was the FBI wrote up the indictment.
Now, hang on just a second. This is the Osage Indians. These are the people from the Killers of the Flower Moon.
Killers of the Flower Moon, which is why DiCaprio family is very, they are working with the Osage tribe on this. They want this story told about the Koch brothers. How did Charles Koch get out of going to prison? By the way, he was up for 70 years in prison for stealing oil from the government and the U.S. reservation. The answer is he figured out that if you buy the judges, and I use that term very carefully about buying the judges, he literally paid off the senators from Kansas and Oklahoma to remove the prosecutor on the case, put in one of Koch's own suppliers, contractors, in as prosecutor, who then immediately dropped the case and did something no prosecutor had ever done. He wrote Charles Koch a letter saying, "You're not a criminal." Wow. It's never happened. So then what Koch learned, this is the beginning of the feared Koch network. Mm-hmm. Because what Koch learned, Charles Koch learned for him and his brothers, what he learned is that if you can buy up the senators and then buy up the judges, so he had a problem. Because one of the ways that he bought up these politicians was by making corporate campaign contributions from Koch Industries to like Senator Bob Dole, Senator Don Nichols, and others. By the way, Don Nichols quit the Senate to become a lobbyist. He quit the Senate to become a lobbyist for Koch Oil. Wow. Senator Nichols. But the problem is they made corporate campaign contributions. They got caught. So now there were congressional hearings, and Koch was subpoenaed. But the hearings are headed by if you remember, Thompson, the guy who played the actor who was a senator from Tennessee.
Oh, yeah, the buffoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he decided to run for president. Who was his campaign chairman? David Koch raised the money for him. He then dropped the subpoena on brother Charles. He shut down the investigation of the illegal campaign corporation contributions. But Koch was still facing an indictment. He still faced, because it was illegal at the time for corporations to donate to politicians. Are you listening to this stuff with Leonard Leo? So he creates the Federalist Society with Leonard Leo, puts in big money with his other billionaire friends, including Harlan Crow. They build the Federalist Society to put on their own Supreme Court so that in Citizens United, they could overturn the basically make Charles Koch's crime legal. Right. So he learned how to do that. And it was Leonard Leo who was his cat's paw to develop a whole string of federal judges. And remember, it's not just the 5 on the Supreme Court. All these appointees,
right, hundreds of federal
judges' positions are basically determined by Leonard Leo and the Federal Society. But he's just the glove. Right. The hand in the glove is Koch.
Wow. And Leonard Leo now has $1.5 billion because this wealthy industrialist or whatever, yeah. I don't recall how he made his money, but he died and he left all his money to Leonard Leo.
Over $1 billion. And so this is going to be your judiciary. But it all started with this crime on a federal reservation, the indictment that went poof, and then the money that paid for that indictment was also crime, so that went poof, and that required having a new Supreme Court, that required having a new judiciary. And that's what Koch got himself. And that's the real story. And so when you look at, and if you look at that picture of Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice, with Charles Koch at his fancy place in Aspen, what you're watching is someone took a picture of a crime. He was being paid to pleasure a guy who's a constant litigant and whose cases are constantly before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, but you say paid. You mean like with vacations and mobile
exactly.
homes
So what happens is that the U.S. Supreme Court, the judges on the U.S. Supreme Court are exempted from the normal federal rules of conduct for judges because the court cannot be told. They exempted themselves from the ethics guidelines that apply to all other judges. And therefore, Clarence Thomas was able to take money, gifts, mobile homes, travel, you name it, including, for example, Paul the Vulture Singer. He went to his hunting lodge up in Alaska. Just these little things. And then when Singer's cases come before the
That's right. There's that
Supreme
picture
Court,
of them with a giant fish.
Yeah, with a giant fish. And we're on the hook for it.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that you have to understand, follow the money. That's what I do and that's why we're actually doing a film about where the Koch fortune started by stealing from the Osage Indians, the tribe in Oklahoma. But now you have to understand that crime led to the political crime wave in America funded by the Koch fortune.
Amazing. All righty. We'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. It's Anything Goes Friday after all. Greg Palast and Thom Hartmann here with you on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. We'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. Hey, Maverick, what's on your mind today?
Tom, the whole first hour I was in a quiet place, and now I'm in a noisy spot again, damn it.
It's okay, I can hear you.
As an old radio guy, it's really cool to hear you in the studio with somebody else. It's got a completely different vibe, and I like it a lot. And I'm really glad that I haven't heard anything like, hey, Thom and Greg here in the morning. How you doing, everybody?
No, we're not the zoo crew.
No puking and no affecting. Thank you very much.
No fart jokes either.
All right. I'm a little bit mad, and here's why. You guys are not challenging Republican, Greg. You guys are not challenging Republican votes because you're being noble. What in the HD double hockey sticks are you thinking? Nobility for a short time versus democracy, maybe forever? Please amplify on that and make me understand how that bit of nobility is more important than democracy. Gentlemen?
Yeah, I think it has more, Greg, to do with the fact that and thank you, Maverick, for that call, that neither you nor I are wealthy. I mean, we're both a couple of middle-class guys. And
it's expensive. But yeah, vote suppression ain't cheap.
Yeah, no, it takes, you really need to have either, billionaires behind you or at least an organized structure. And the big progressive organizations that have that organized structure that could pull something like this off, the ACLU, the Black Votes Matter, et cetera, they're just absolutely unwilling to do this.
They're unwilling to do this because these are people who've literally, like I was telling you about, being at the poll with Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin. She's in a walker. She's thrown out into a storm. It's pouring rain, saying, you can't vote here anymore. You don't live in Georgia anymore. Martin Luther King's cousin. She lived down the street. I went to her home where they said she doesn't live anymore. So if you've been through that.
Where there's a picture of her with Martin Luther King.
Yeah, with a picture of her
house for dinner every Sunday after church.
Sunday, right. So what happened was, if you've been through that as a black person, Hispanic person, told you can't vote, you just don't want it to happen to anyone else, even if you hate them. And so they just say, we would rather spend our time and money getting people re-registered. And so what happened is when we found about the illegal purges in Georgia, we were able to get out of 198,000 illegal purges in the year of 2020. As a federal court noted, we already got 100,000 people back. So they spent their money getting people re-registered. Because we saved 100,000 votes, Biden won the state. It's not that I was, I'm nonpartisan. It's not like I'm trying to get Biden to win the state. I just said people should be allowed to vote. So we worked very, very hard to get people that were illegally removed back on the voter rolls, went to court with these things.
Stacey Abrams.
And you would rather they'd rather spend their time and money getting people their right to vote rather than taking away other people's. But I understand the strategic temptation of saying, they do it, why don't we do it? I certainly get it, brother.
Yeah,
Thanks,
well,
Maverick.
I wonder, I mean, if organizations that are principally run by people of color, Hispanics and blacks, don't want to do this because of, what you just described, maybe we need to get some white organization. I don't know. It's
we just,
I hate to racialize
I think
this,
it's very important. I think it wouldn't hurt to say, we could do this too, babies.
I think what it would do is create, the Republicans would scream and yell. I mean, they would yell bloody murder if we started knocking them off the voting rolls. And that would highlight this hole in our system that allows this to happen. And, and that's the problem, is there's no publicity for it.
That's we need publicity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's why we have the Hartmann Show.
There you go. And the great work you're doing.
Thank you.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So remember the John Durham investigation in which he said, the FBI never should have looked into Donald Trump's connections to Russia. And I'm scratching my head going, how can he even think this? I mean, the guy that Donald Trump hired as his first campaign manager, Paul Manafort had taken $66 million from oligarchs associated with Vladimir Putin to install Viktor Yanukovych as the dictator of Ukraine. $66 million. He took money from, he was paid $1 million by the dictator of Zaire, back when it was Zaire, to develop a strong relationship with Moscow. And when finally they threw Yanukovych out of Ukraine, that was in 2015, what did Manafort do? He came to the United States and he said to Donald Trump, well, let me help you, while he's taking money from Moscow. I mean, if nothing else, that should have been a starting point, a huge starting point for the FBI. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 22 minutes past the hour, and we're picking up your calls here. Bob in Otis, Indiana. Hey, Bob, what's up?
I hope you gentlemen are having a splendid day out there.
It's better than one that's not as good, for sure. What's up?
Well, congratulate me for the first time in my 73-odd years. I am finally on private health insurance. And it goes by the name of Hoosier Medicaid.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Good on you.
They found a way to do it.
Yeah.
And so I am now, I'm trying to think of the name of it. I didn't care. I just said, put me on one of them.
Yeah.
And because they said, well, you can pick one of the three. And if you don't pick one of the three, don't worry. We're putting you on one of them no matter what.
Well, congratulations, Bob. Yep. Is there a question in there or anything like that?
Well, I just want you to know that this is their way of taking us Medicaid folks and getting us on private insurance.
Oh, so what you're saying is that in Ohio they have a private corporation, or in Indiana they have a private corporation administering their Medicaid programs. Yeah, this is a big fad right now in Republican states.
Yes, and so something I never had to worry about before, I now have to worry about.
Right, pre-clearance.
Well, it's all of my doctors have to be in network on my program.
Right.
If they are not, I said, well, what if they aren't? Oh, well, that's no problem. You just get yourself another doctor.
Right, or write a check.
Or write a check, which is beautiful because I only, for my eyes, the doctor I need, there is no one else close to me that I can go to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is the loveliness of private health care.
Yeah. Bob, thanks for the heads up on that. Greg, this is a trend that's happening all over the country, where because the Medicaid money is essentially block granted. I mean, you know, I don't think it's literally block granted, but Medicaid money goes to the states, and then the states distribute it however they choose. They can add, you know, brand it with particular names. In California, I think it's called Medi-Cal.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it's called here in Oregon, but there's a similar program. But many of these states, these Republican-controlled states, instead of setting up a government bureaucracy to deal with it and administer the programs, they're just turning them over to the big insurance companies and say, run it for us. And then the insurance companies start denying care to people, and that's how they make money.
Yeah, well, and don't forget, politicians can't be pleasured with cash by people working in Medicare or Medicaid offices. They can only get pleasured by the private insurance companies who then can write checks. Remember, these are profit centers for politicians, and we have to remember that. So it's part of the program of eliminating Social Security, eliminating Medicare. What's going to happen, I saw this in other countries, they ended up privatizing, like in Chile, privatizing.
Yeah, this is one of the first things Pinochet did.
Yeah, and so one of the things is, what they do is and in Britain you see this too, but they've never gotten rid of the National Health Service because
they've tried.
Any doctor, but they've tried. And so what happens is that they destroy the government program so you don't like it. They'll destroy the post office and then say, oh, we got to privatize it because look how badly the government
Louis DeJoy is doing that right now.
And so they'll destroy Medicare, they'll destroy Medicaid and say, see how badly the government handles these programs? Turn over to private industry. Well, it's the turning over to private industry which is taking away your health care. And that's what's going on. And again, it's all about the money.
And the problem is that, you know, Bob is an informed insurance and consumer. You know, I think in part because he listens to this program. I talk about this a lot, but you know, maybe he's just a really bright guy. But most people are not, and most people have spent their whole lives on corporate health insurance, and so they're used to having to have everything they do, their doctor does pre-guessed, you know, pre-guessed, pre-cleared, and they just figure, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. Whereas people who are on real Medicare, for example, or real Medicaid administered by the states, you don't have to, you know, your doctor doesn't have to jump through 16 hoops to get you an MRI.
There are no death panels on Medicare, despite what they say. It's only the private insurance company that have the death panels. Really?
Absolutely right. We'll be back with more of your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where smart people get their news. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann and Greg Palast with you on Anything Goes Friday. Today we're reading from my book.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskanson Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. There is a long history of right-wing, conservative, Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices becoming liberals, or at least becoming reasonable. Earl Warren is probably the best-known example. He was, a right-wing governor of California. He was a hard-ass Alameda County prosecutor, a district attorney, and when Eisenhower put him on the court, A year later, he did the Brown versus Brown v. Board of Education case. He ended discrimination, racial discrimination in schools, or at least, tried to end it. So why are Republican billionaires now sucking up to conservative members of the Supreme Court? In my opinion, it's not a quid pro quo. They're not trying to get specific votes on specific issues. They're trying to prevent them from doing what Earl Warren did, which is waking up and voting for the benefit of America rather than just their patrons. There's a whole piece about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, and pick up calls?
Why not?
Okay. Marion in South Beach, Oregon. Hey, Marion. Marion, you're on the air.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. God, the history is just the history of corruption is amazing, and it's just mind-boggling to think about that it's still going on today. And really, we need to do away with Citizen United. I mean, that's really the way to fix modern corruption.
Yep.
But what I wanted to do is share something with your listeners. I recently had a medical event, and my doctor prescribed me some medicine for that. And initially, I'm on Medicare, being on Social Security, and initially they prescribed me something that was paid for, but it gave me tremendous side effects, and so they switched the medication. Well, when we picked up the new medication, it turns out that it was $1,200 total, and Medicare only paid $700 of those $1,200, which would have left me with $500 to pay for it.
Right.
Well, I mean, we're not exactly rich. We're middle income family, and so that's $500 is a big chunk in our budget. Anyways, the nice lady at the pharmacy said, well, let me see, there is sort of this internet discount card. You might be able to get a discount through them. And so she looked it up on the internet and said, yeah. And without Medicare, just through that private internet discount card, they got the price down from $1,200 to $83.
Wow. Is that like GoodRx, those apps that do that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we were able to get the medication for $83 without the help of Medicare, and I think that's disgusting. I think Medicare should be able to negotiate the cheapest prices, especially for people that are retired, that are old, that are on a budget, that, don't know differently. And so, really, we need to get money out of politics. Citizen United needs to go away, and we need to do better for our seniors and for our young people, any generation, really.
Yeah. Well,
so that's all I wanted to share with you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marion. That was brilliant. And this is, by the way, it's not just Medicare. I mean, there's a private insurance company in this game, and that's Medicare Part D. Congress created the donut hole. So you don't pay more than, I think it's $2,500 a year now, something like that, maybe $3,000. But the Part D, I mean, most people are paying between $30 and $100 a month just for their prescription drug coverage on Medicare.
Well, I spend a lot of time, because I do write for The Guardian. I was a BBC reporter. I lived in Britain. I wasn't a citizen. And they said I had needed drugs for my kids. And they said it's £7, 7 quid, was about $10. That's the maximum for any drug at all.
In the United Kingdom.
In the United Kingdom. Because they say health care is a right. They didn't ask, I said, I have to say, I want to tell you I'm not a citizen. They said, you're a human being. You get medicine when you need it. We can't charge you through the nose. That's the maximum that can be charged.
Yeah.
And, the U.S. government, as you know, Medicare is not allowed. It's finally got some authority, but mostly cannot bargain or import medicines from Canada or anything else to cut the price. Imagine if you were told, okay, well, Thom Hartmann, if you want to buy a car, you're not allowed to bargain for a better price. Medicare is the biggest purchaser of medicine on the planet, and they are denied the power of the purchase to cut prices.
By Republicans.
By Republicans. They literally are not. The people that supposedly believe, we believe in the free market, unless it hurts the drug companies, then freedom is a sometime thing, So that's how it works.
Yeah, we were in the UK. I was giving a speech at King's College, and on ADHD, actually. This was in the late 90s. And we had our youngest child with us. And she got a terrible ear infection. And so the people we were staying with called the local surgery, the local doctor's office. And this was, in the evening. This was after I got done with the speech. It was probably 10 o'clock at night. And the doctor who answered the phone, or who took the call, said, I'm just about to leave, so I'll just drop by your place on my way home. And so he literally came to their house. Our daughter was already in bed. Louise and I and the doctor went into her bedroom, and he said, don't even get out of bed. You're fine, and we don't want to disturb her sleep. But let me look at her ear. And he looked at her ear, and he said, you've just got a basic bacterial infection. Here's some amoxicillin. And he gave Louise the pills and said, have her take these. And as he was leaving, I was like, what do I owe you? And he said, you don't owe me anything. This is England.
I know, they don't even have bills. They literally don't have bills.
They don't have a system for billing.
Because they don't have, that America spends more on medical than any other nation, but it's not really medical. 45% of our medical bills go through the insurance bureaucracy, goes through all these billing systems. All these nations literally save trillions of dollars by not having any billing system in Germany and in the UK.
Here we've got pharmacy benefit managers, middlemen who are making as much as, and they're becoming rich.
They literally don't have it, so that they save all this money. And anyone who says, but I wouldn't want to have the socialized medicine of England, let me tell you, I've had medicine in the U.S., medicine in the UK. There is no comparison. And my mother-in-law, who was a nurse in the U.S., said that her care in Britain beat anything that she could have done in her New York hospital.
Yeah. No, and
it's free.
People call, every now and then I get some right-winger who calls in and goes, oh, you don't want to, nationalize, you don't want the Canadian system, you don't want the British, oh my God, you socialize, it's and immediately, and I'll try to defend these systems, but, I live here. And immediately, I start getting calls from Canadians, from Brits, from people watching on YouTube, listening from all over the world.
They think we're weird.
I know, they think
we don't
we're nuts.
If you're sick, where's your wallet? They ask you for your wallet first instead of taking your pulse. They take your wallet.
Exactly. Well, they won't see you if you don't have insurance.
I know.
If you can't pay.
Stick them back in the ambulance.
That's right.
There's the poor hospital over there.
Yeah,
seriously,
it's nuts. All right, Diane in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi. Before I get to what I called about, just real quick, over $4 trillion has been borrowed by presidents out of the Social Security Fund, and can't be replaced by the. Okay, the gasoline. When someone complains to you about the gasoline,
well, before we move on to gasoline, let me just respond to what you just said. Social Security has a $2.5 billion surplus right now. And the reason for that is because when Reagan did his, this is the one good thing that Reagan did with Social Security, is they realized that when the boomers started retiring around 2000, 2005, there was going to be more people retiring and calling in Social Security benefits than the system would be able to pay for. Because up until 1986, it was pay as you go. And so they wanted to create a couple of billion, $2 to $3 billion surplus that they would then pay down over the 20 or 30-year period as all the boomers retired and eventually died off and no longer were an expense. And so Reagan almost doubled the amount that we pay into Social Security in '86. So boomers paid not only for the retirement of their parents, but also for their own retirement. Now, Social Security is sitting on $2.5 billion and, $1 trillion, as I recall. Yeah, $1 trillion. Thank you. And so Social Security is sitting on $2.5 trillion. Now, what do you do if you've got $2.5 trillion? You have to invest it someplace. And what's the safest investment on earth? U.S. Treasuries. Now, Treasuries are debt instruments. Treasuries are IOUs from the government. So the Social Security Trust Fund bought Treasuries. Now, technically, if you buy a Treasury, you are loaning money to the government, right? And they will pay you back when you redeem the Treasury. You can buy a treasury too, and you can say, hey, the government owes me money too. But it's not really that Congress took money away from Social Security. Nobody took money away from Social Security. Social Security invested that money. Our national debt, and this is one of the core tenets of modern monetary theory, our national debt is private and governmental investment. And the reason why when Andrew Jackson, for the one single time in the history of the United States, paid our national debt down to zero, and I think it was 1833, maybe 1836, that triggered the longest and deepest depression in the history of America, was because there was no place where commercial entities, big banks and anything else, could safely put their money. Nobody trusted the banks. And so it just froze up all economic activity. So when you hear right-wingers or, Pete Peterson used to sing this song all the time. I don't know if the Peterson Institute still is, saying, oh, the government has spent your Medicare money. Well, and it's all borrowed. That's just because Medicare invested it in treasuries. And it's a special kind of treasury, by the way, that has priority over all other treasuries. So there's no way that money is not coming back to, Social Security. I said Medicare. There's no way that money's not coming back to Social Security. So this is a right-wing canard that the billionaires push because they're afraid that if the national debt continues to grow, eventually somebody's going to say, we probably shouldn't have a debt this large. We need to raise the taxes on billionaires. That's what's going on, Diane. Greg, you want to add anything to that?
No, you covered it. Except, yeah, this is the constant thing that we're running out of money into Social Security. Oh, we're running out. We're always running out of money in Social Security. And I've done pension fund administration for unions. Some years you do go negative. Yeah. But unless America ain't going to be here for another 100 years,
right? You
don't have to worry. I think we might be here.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe. Go. Diane, thank you for the call. And sorry, we're hitting a break here. We'll be right back. 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's Anything Goes Friday. We're picking up your calls here. Thom Hartmann, Greg Palast. GregPalast.com. Check it out. And welcome back, Lynn in Los Angeles. Hey, Lynn. Thanks for calling. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. I would love clarification and to be updated on the RICO case against Trump in Fulton County. And I did a little research myself to understand it. In 2020, I know that they elected they went from 5 to 14 minority DAs in the state, which was good news. And then the Republican legislature freaked out and passed SB 92, establishing a commission to prosecute for willful misconduct or for any little thing the DAs. That's bad news, the prosecution. Then the Supreme Court found SB 92 ineffective or illegal. Then the Republicans passed SB 332, which is in effect now, and I'm waiting for that commission to approach Fani Willis and maybe find her incompetent. Now, I heard, Greg, I heard you in an interview with Dennis Bernstein in February on Flashpoints, and you said that you looked into Fani Willis's past and you concluded she was very corrupt, had a long history of unfair, unethical behavior as a prosecutor, like when she put some teachers in jail for felonies with the testing thing. And you predicted that they would be found guilty of perjury and that we would lose the case. That hasn't happened, but, it still could. She still could be relieved of the case, I think. And you mentioned a woman, Anna Jones, who's a killer. In other words, a very effective prosecutor. I'm wondering, where do things stand now? And yeah, just what
Great
about
question.
that?
Thank you, Lynn. Greg?
Okay, yes, I'm glad you brought up. It's a terrible situation. Fani Willis made a terrible mistake, hiring her boyfriend who didn't have any courtroom experience in these issues, or federal felony or RICO experience. I've been in RICO cases in Georgia. It's really complex. She should have resigned as soon as this story came out. She should have resigned with her boyfriend and let the rest of the people in her office take over. Now she's got the problem that that now the case appears tainted. There is this law in Georgia. They've been waiting for their chance to remove her. And now here's the trick. If they remove Fani Willis, it doesn't go to Fulton County just to get her replacement, her assistants who are really running the case. She's not running the case. She's not even in the courtroom, by the way. She shouldn't even be there. But what happens is it goes to the state prosecutor if it's taken away from the county. And he is a Republican stooge. He's just going to drop the case. This is the danger. This is why I was hoping that Fani Willis would step aside. You have the best trial lawyers here, like Gerald Griggs, who, by the way, I should mention is my own lawyer. He's head of the NAACP in Georgia. He's an amazing trial lawyer. African-American. You want an African-American woman? C.K. Hoffman is one of the greatest trial attorneys. She's right there in Atlanta. Why aren't these attorneys running this case? Instead, it was a terrible mistake that Fani Willis turned this into, a personal honeypot. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Democrats do these things. They're just like anyone else. But so the case is in danger, and that's a terrible shame. Terrible shame. And I hope, because I've read the indictments several times, this case is lock solid against Trump. He should be breaking rocks on a chain gang. This is racketeering in your face. And I'd hate to see it go down just because of charges of misconduct and games by the Republican Party to use that to let a criminal run free.
There you go. Greg Palast. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Kevin in Omaha, Nebraska. You've got a question for Greg, I understand?
Yes, I do. I noticed you focused a lot on voter suppression, but everybody's ignoring the fact that there's other ways to steal an election. I was a poll worker in 2022 in the Blue Dot in Nebraska, and there's some crazy stuff going on here. They have a rule. They started it in 2022 for COVID. This is November 2022, where the ballots could be transported to the counting center by one person. It had always been that, a person of the opposite party had to go along with the ballots, but they said because of COVID, they didn't want two people in the car, so we're just going to suspend that rule. Well, now they can't do that anymore. So now they've just said because the inspector acts as a nonpartisan, we're just going to trust them with the ballots by themselves. And this is the only time when the ballots are in the the voted ballots are in the sole possession of a person that's usually a Republican on the way to the counting center. Once they get to the counting center, you have double locks, security locks, you got windows, cameras everywhere, but there's absolutely zero security. And the other thing is they use stickers for ballot seals. They're not even real ballot seals. They're not tamper-proof, and I saw one violated right before my eyes. The inspector forgot to put in a transfer sheet along with the ballot, and she just peeled the sticker right off that I had signed, and I thought, the ballots were secure in there. And then she put the report back in and resealed it. So she had full access to these ballots, and then on top of that, she faked the timesheet so she could leave 20 minutes early. So she had those ballots by herself and completely unsecured in the privacy of her car for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, as long as she wanted. It takes 10 seconds to overvote a ballot. And
disqualify. Yes. So I mean, look, luckily, we don't have a lot of instances of, in fact, we have virtually no proven instances of this type of ballot tampering. And so it's very minor, very small if it exists at all. But yeah, ballots, there should be control of possession of ballots in all cases. I 100% agree with you, but we want to be very careful that we don't pick up the Republican trope that ballot fraud is easy. yes, there are always problems in any system. I'm glad you nailed it, and thank God for people like you in the system who keep it clean and honest. But basically, what we have in America is not so much tampering with the ballots. What we have is people being denied their right to get the ballot. They're purged, they're stopped, they're blocked, they're challenged by vigilantes. Their votes are disqualified. You're very well, and you talked about that term overvote. That means that there's 2 marks on a ballot for a candidate, and so that ballot gets
when there should
thrown
only
out.
Be one.
Yeah, when there should only be one.
Then the ballot, excuse me, the ballot doesn't get thrown out. That vote gets thrown out.
The vote
if
gets
the voter
thrown out.
went to check.
So are you ready for this? I'll give you a good case of this overvote. In Florida in 2000, where George Bush supposedly won the presidency of the United States by just 537 votes, in the blackest county in Florida, okay, the blackest county in Florida, it said write in candidate's name on the ballot for president. Not write -in, but write in the candidate's name. 700 people wrote Al Gore. Those 700 votes were disqualified because they said people had checked the box for Al Gore, and then it says when it said write in candidate's name, they wrote in Al Gore. Yeah. Now, it used to be in America that the voter's intent is clear. If someone checks Al Gore and writes Al Gore, what do you think that their intent is? Do you think it's maybe Al Gore? But no, they threw that out, and that 700 votes made George W. Bush president. Those are some of the games. So those are the real games we have to worry about. And yes, I don't want anyone to be able to have a stack of ballots where they can add extra marks and get your vote disqualified. You're right, that is a dangerous and terrible thing. I'm glad that you're calling it out. Thank you.
I'm calling it out, but I can't do anything about it. That's the rule. They kept it for the upcoming November election.
This is why we're here today, to warn you to be careful with your ballot. And obviously, one of the things I'm just going to say it again and again and again. Go to gregpalast.com, and we're going to have up places where you can see if your vote has been purged. Just go to gregpalast.com. You can sign up, and we'll have up those websites as we get closer to election year, what states are removing voters, to see if you've been removed, if you've been purged, so that you can re-register to vote in time. That's the biggest thing I'm telling people. We had about 24 million people removed from the voter rolls this past couple of years. Now, most of those are people who really have moved. They have died. But unfortunately, there's way too many people losing their votes. So please be careful with your vote. Be careful with your ballot. Do use the drop boxes. Make sure you've signed all the places you're supposed to sign. You know all about that. You can tell your
Kevin, thank you very much
Thank
for the call. It was great hearing from you. And thanks for listening to us there in Omaha, Nebraska. We'll be back on the other side of this break at the top of the hour, starting our third hour of Anything Goes Friday with Thom Hartmann and Greg Palast. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
The book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the civil rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, Quote, a lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith, end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Thom Hartmann here with you, and we've been talking with Greg Palast for a couple of hours. He's still with us, and let's pick up some calls here, Greg. Rich in Indianapolis. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks very much. I wanted to bring an idea forward about hypnotic suggestion and how it may have something to do with Clarence Thomas. Are you game?
Yeah.
I'm game.
Yeah, I'm curious. Go for it.
Hit me.
Okay. Well, back in the day, Ginny Thomas was a client and customer for this company, this self-development company called LifeSpring.
Oh yeah, it was a cult. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was a business, and it operated as a cult. Mm-hmm. And what happened was that people were being put under hypnotic suggestion, and in that state of trance, they were manipulated into behavior. And the behavior generally was to be a promoter of the program and a salesperson. It was actually something that I sort of tangentially found out about. Somebody who had been a customer was an acquaintance of mine, and they told me about the cult concept and them having been harmed, and they had actually received a judgment against the company and collected on it. They changed their life with the remuneration that was forced by the court. Mm-hmm. So they were also really terrified of what it meant to be put in a trance.
So what do we have to worry about now?
Okay. Well, Ginny had been through all this, and she was actually this super staunch anti-cult, anti-LifeSpring purpose, and she's potentially still very much affected by that which she had to endure.
Yeah, I've read several articles about Ginny Thomas being a cult member and being deprogrammed and everything else. Apparently she's got a very fragile psyche.
Well, here's how it could be, and I described it as Russian nesting dolls as the idea. Ginny could definitely still be this person under the influence of hypnotic suggestion and could be being directed. Mm-hmm. At the same time, she is entirely aware as someone who came through that and what it means, and she would have the ability to potentially be a hypnotist. Now, if she were a hypnotist with her husband as the unaware as she had been, she, as a weird version of a Manchurian candidate, could be directing her husband, and he could be like harmlessly, apparently, agreeing with people like what's Crow's first name?
Yeah, Harlan
the guy
Crow.
who's his benefactor, Harlan. So it's like, well, he's just my friend, and this is the stuff that he does for me, and I don't have to really answer to anybody. I mean, we're the Supreme Court, and like here's this loophole that they're driving this corruption truck through. And
well, I think that
go ahead.
Sorry, I'm thinking that what they use for hypnosis. It's not a watch going back and forth. It's several $100 bills. and I don't think you really need to hypnotize Clarence Thomas to take a free $250,000 mobile home. Most people will accept the free $250,000 mobile home, free trips to Alaska to go salmon fishing, hang out with Charles Koch in Aspen, the best skiing in the world with the uber rich and the uber richer. I think that's the hypnosis. And so I don't think that there's nothing that Jenny could do. The idea that somehow Clarence Thomas would be a nice, thoughtful, liberal, judicious judge, fair and informed, unless he were hypnotized. It's only Jenny Thomas's hypnosis is the problem.
You made a great point.
Okay, so that's that. I think
you made a great point. So I've got a punchline, and this is where my conspiracy theory came from.
Okay,
I was watching John Oliver's Last Week Tonight as a YouTube.
Yeah.
And he had these two little clips of Justice Thomas speaking, and he said the same phrase twice, "My best friend in the whole world." And it was in this monotone, unlively way of saying it. And I thought, if somebody was given a hypnotic suggestion of, and I'm your best friend in the whole world, and that's how it was coming out repeatedly.
I think it's more likely. I think it's more likely that both of them are in a cult right now, and that cult is called the GOP, the conservative movement, and I think it does qualify as a cult. It's got its own religious elements, it's got its own epistemology, it's got its own theology, it's got its own origin stories. It's got all the stuff, a manipulative leadership, it's exploitative, it extracts wealth from the people who participate in it. I think that, I think it really qualifies, Rich. Rich, thanks for the call. That's an interesting one. Good talking to you. Further thoughts, or shall we pick up the next call?
Let's take the next call.
Okay, Michael in Darien, Illinois. Hey, Michael, you're on the air. What's up?
Good afternoon. I had a question to ask. A month ago, the U.S. was talking about training pilots for Ukraine and providing them with aircraft and whatnot. I haven't heard anything of what's going on with any of that. They surely could use it right now.
Yeah, there's a consortium of European countries. I did this story last Tuesday or Wednesday. There's a consortium of European countries that are sending F-16s to Ukraine. The article did not say when they would be arriving or when they would even begin shipping. But there's some of them coming from, as I recall, Finland. I think some of them are coming from Greece. They were all F-16s, though, and to the best of my knowledge, the Ukrainian pilots have been training in Europe for several months now. Do you know anything more about that, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they have to speed this up.
Yeah.
This is a desperate situation. And we have a guy, I won't use his name, just I refer to him as Agent Orange, who has stopped us from helping an ally from being eaten alive. Ukraine may not be in NATO, but they are our ally and our first line of defense against this fascist takeover. This is very, our soul is on the line here. And I know that Biden, he probably should have moved quicker and earlier, thinking, oh, well, of course, America's always going to have bipartisan support against our enemies. But that hasn't happened. And I think that Biden assumed bipartisanship and sensibility in our foreign policy. And now we're all the Ukrainians are paying the price. But let's put the blame where it is. Yeah, it's been slow mode here, but we've got a guy running for president who says he's going to let Ukraine get rolled over by his buddy.
It's been 16 months that the Republicans have been blocking Ukraine aid, ever since they took over the House in January of last year. 16 months.
It's frightening.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Who will stand by America if we don't stand by them?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. We'll be right back. It's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be right back with more of your calls for me and Greg Palast. Stay with us. It's just about 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Speaking the truth, the GOP would really rather you didn't know. I'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. Steve in New Boston, Michigan. Hey, Steve, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yes, gentlemen. You both have given me reason to ask you both a question. If you don't mind, I will be quick. Greg, I'd like to ask you first about the voter challengers and use the example of the woman who turned in a thumb drive with over 2,000 names on it.
32,000 names. 32,000. She had a thumb drive with 32,000 names, but she also had loaded guns, and so I left her house when it got a little heavy.
Okay, well, let's talk about this one. The people who were on that thumb drive that were truly legitimate voters and had their votes not counted, that woman needs to be held for libel. I mean, she's done nothing more than bring like a frivolous lawsuit against these people. And she needs to be held responsible for this. You just can't do this. I can't think of anything more un-American than to have my vote taken away from me because somebody says I'm not a legitimate voter. And I'd like to take my answers from you offline after this call. But, Tom, I got one for you. Well, you talk about Clarence Thomas. Many years ago, my family took a cruise, and I bought a raffle ticket. And that raffle ticket, I won another cruise. And the cruise line sent me a tax form. Is Harlan Crow, are these guys sending tax forms to Clarence Thomas so he can declare all of these free gifts and motorhomes and stuff?
Bingo, they are not, and that's the very question that Sheldon Whitehouse has been asking, and it's one of the reasons why he wants Harlan Crow, why he subpoenaed him to come testify before Congress, and of course it's why Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo are ignoring the subpoena. Thank you, Steve.
Why aren't they in jail? Why aren't they in jail for ignoring those subpoenas? You and I would be.
Because they're wealthy Republicans. I mean, you know, I think is the answer.
The
Greg,
problem is that you make your crimes. What Charlie Koch learned, and what I've learned in doing my film now on the Koch, which is, by the way, called Long Knife, Osage, the Osage Tribe, Coke Oil, and the New Trail of Tears.
When's this movie going to be out?
And we don't know. It'll be the DiCaprios are talking right now with, I won't say what studios to help get this out. But look, yes, that woman who challenged 32,000 people. And then there was the guy who dresses like Doc Holliday. By the way, she's like Marjorie Taylor Greene's point person. She's a GOP official. This Republican official in downstate Georgia challenged 4,000 people. We had another, these massive vigilante challengers, self-described. You bet they really should be sued for libel, because that's what I think has been missing from some of the legal strategy when you talk about what actions to take. Make these people pay. You are libeling someone. You're saying that someone's an illegal voter. You're accusing them of a felony crime.
Yeah.
And yes, so they really should be taken to task.
So why isn't the ACLU or the Black Voters Fund or whatever going?
They've tried different tactics. They're trying to get the laws removed, and they were trying to go after True the Vote. There's this one organization out of Texas which is generating these sheets of material, but they are backed, of course, by these big billionaires, including, for example, the Bradley family of Wisconsin. And so they've been trying to do. The problem is in America, litigation is expensive, it's long, it's difficult, and you've got a lot of judges that say, well, if that's a state law, that's a state law. And so they're afraid if they go challenge someone for libel, they'll say, well, the law says I can challenge any voter I think is an illegal voter.
Right.
They happen to only challenge Democrats, black people, young people, and liberal women.
Yeah, there you go. But it is, so I guess the answer to his question is that you can't sue because they're doing something that the law provides for.
Yeah,
we need to change the law.
We need to change the law.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. It's 19 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds, and we'll be picking up more of your calls for Greg and me. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So after the horrific school shooting in Tennessee, leaving 3 9-year-olds dead, as well as three adults, the Tennessee legislature has taken 2 very interesting steps. The first is they're moving to shield gun manufacturers and sellers from liability lawsuits. But even more interesting, the legislature has just passed a bill that sets up a statewide system where you can turn in teachers for teaching things that make children feel bad about themselves, specifically teaching white children that white people once enslaved black people. Seriously. Or teaching that, about the Holocaust, for example, that, white people in Germany killed Jews. This is apparently going to be not just outlawed in Tennessee, but there's a whole apparatus being set up right now so that you can turn in your neighbors. It's just, there's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 20 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here for Thom and Greg. Clay in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Hey, Clay, you're on the air. What's up?
You are listening to the Thom and Greg Show.
Indeed.
Yeah. And it's great.
Thank you.
Nice format. Greg, have you ever heard of, I'm sure you've heard of the Night Stalker?
Yes.
Every time I see you, I think of Kolchak. That hat.
Is that good or bad?
I get that all the time.
Oh, do you? Okay.
He shouldn't have stolen my hat from me. I still regret it.
Yeah. Fedora, isn't that hat a fedora?
This is a fedora, a real Stetson fedora, yes.
There you go.
So call you the fraud stalker as an election fraud.
I will use that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Thom, with regard to the gas prices, I don't disagree with you at all about, what may cause prices to rise, but it would kind of be nice, I think, if you could frame it in terms of demand and like summer driving demand increase and stuff.
Yeah.
Here I haven't really seen a great increase in prices. In fact,
in Mississippi,
gas here is about $2.80 right now, and it did go over $3, but it's back down to $2.80.
Yeah, probably because you've got a lot of refineries around you down in Mississippi.
Yeah. And, and of course, that was the other point, that there are probably other local factors in it.
Yeah, I understand in California there's at least one major refinery that's been shut down for maintenance for a while, and that's been driving gas prices up. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But they're coming up here in Oregon, too. We're Sean, what was the last time you bought? Around $5?
Wow.
Not just about 5, 4.5.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. Well, thank you, Clay.
Keep up the good work, guys.
We'll do our best.
My hat to you.
There you go. Literally. Dave in Hale, Michigan. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Oh, a lot of things. How you doing, guys?
Good.
Hey, Greg, I wanted to ask you something. I want to pick your mind about the free market. You said you were kind of educated in.
Yes.
When I was in high school, when I was in high school, we in general business class, one of the first things, real quick, was they said you had to be up. Remember to try to save 15 to 17% of your paycheck if you can, because you're going to need it in the future. You get that part. Okay. Now, when we got our raise, I'm Social Security, about 70 years old right now, and I've worked 50, 60 hours a week, so I'm pretty well wasted. But anyway, is something that I don't get, is something about out of balance here, because what I'm thinking is, is there a depreciation value that it was considered with our raise of 2.5%? Because even though you shell out the money and give people money, it doesn't mean that you cured the problem, because the depreciation on things like my car, my plates are still, like $170 a month on a 20-year-old car. The insurance is, the cost of everything. I don't get this. Is there something that we can do, like a voucher or something, for needed necessities to run our homes, or, which I consider a business? I just want to see what you guys got to think about, how we can work that for necessities, that we see that we need,
Got it. So, thank you, Dave.
Well, here's a couple interesting. First of all, the raise you're getting from Social Security is not really a raise. What it is, it's an inflation adjustment. So as prices go up, the law does say that if you're on Social Security, that at the end of the year, and one time they actually did an extra one, but you get covered for just the rise in prices. So you're staying even. That raise from Social Security ain't a raise at all. It's just keeping you even. And, right now we're fighting a long-term GOP plan to eliminate Social Security, usually through this sidestep of privatizing it. And here's a cool one for you. You talk about covering necessities. Now, my mentor was the right-wing, ultra-uber free market economist, Milton Friedman. I expect you and demand that you read Tom's book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, which is about that. I wrote the intro because I was Milton's student. Yeah. And believe it or not, though, he said, America's a rich country. If we really want to take care of people, he didn't like government, he didn't like Social Security, he didn't like any of those things. He just said there should be a guaranteed minimum income, I kid you not, this is from Milton Friedman, which in today's money would be, ready? He says every family in America at the beginning of the year should be given $90,000. Because America, we can afford it, and then do what you want. Then we don't need food stamps or other programs. Just give everyone $90,000. And I'm not kidding. No, because at that time, greed wasn't first. Even right-wing Republicans thought you can't let people die. You can't let people not be able to heat their houses. You can't let people go into foreclosure. There was actually a belief by both right and left that Americans have to take care of each other. Then when the greedsters took over, that was it. And so even the right-wing party of Milton Friedman doesn't exist. Now he'd be considered a Bernie Sanders socialist. And these guys now, because it's not the Republican Party anymore, it's the Koch party, okay? Mm-hmm. And it's the Harlan Crow party, and it's Paul the Vulture Singer party. These are the guys. So it's no longer, it's a greedy old party. And I'm not being partisan about this. I'm just telling you as an economist and as a journalist, this is what's happened.
Yeah, and it's not been an accident.
No, it's been programmatic. That's why I've been doing this story about the Koch brothers and their origin story when they said we have to change, we can change the legislature, we can change the government, we can change the judiciary.
Right.
The Kochs actually wrote, we should eliminate public education. Why is the government paying for people to go to school?
Oh, I know. In 1980, that was David Koch's platform. And close all public schools.
Close all public schools.
Because us billionaires don't want to pay our taxes. I get it. All right, we'll be right back. Well, we'll be back in a couple of minutes with Thom and Greg here on Anything Goes Friday. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back with your calls.
We're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by 2 men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War. The other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmanReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Let's pick up your calls here. Ed in Chicago. Hey, Ed, you got a question for Greg?
Yeah, I sure do. But really quickly, gas prices here in Chicagoland and the burbs and stuff have been increasing for the past month. They've been going up little by little. So they're well over what they were a month ago. Greg, my question to you is, are you, in regards to people being removed from voting rolls, are you working with anyone in the Democratic Party? And along those lines, who would you suggest that we contact in the Democratic Party? Because I got to tell you, when I talk to aides of my reps on the phone, this is so outlandish that, a lot of times they tend to think that it's just conspiracy theory.
Well, one of the problems we're running into, by the way, is that because we started this unfortunate trope in the Democratic Party that elections never get stolen in America. Well, what was Bush v. Gore? So instead of saying, when Donald Trump first said in 2016 the election is rigged, yeah, he was rigging it. So there are rigged elections. There are stolen elections. It's one of the problems. So the Democratic Party is gun-shy about taking these things on. They finally did hire a great lawyer, Mark Elias. I don't work with the Democratic Party because I'm a nonpartisan journalist, but I do work with, and these are the groups to really be aware of, Black Voters Matter. Latasha Brown, who heads that's an amazing group. So Black Voters Matter Fund, that's a place to go to participate. The Georgia NAACP, great group. You've got some fantastic group. There's a group called Transformative Justice Coalition, headed by Barbara Arnwine, who used to be head of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights under Law. These are important groups that are really on the front lines doing the great work. And I work with, and of course I also work with the Reverend Jesse Jackson and Rainbow Push. C.K. Hoffler is a great voting rights attorney who is the Reverend's attorney. So you have organizations on the front line, but they aren't the Democratic Party. And obviously, maybe the Democrats want to do something because for the most part, it's their voters that are on the line. But I tend to work myself with the not-for-profits because I'm very much nonpartisan. I'm just trying to save people's votes. Vote the way you want.
Yeah, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Susha in Venice, California. Hey, Susha, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, thanks. Yes, regarding voter intimidation at the polling places and ballot drop boxes, I have a question and then a point. How do ordinary citizens have the right to ask to see voter ID of other citizens? I think you were saying these vigilantes were like, putting the screws to incoming voters.
There's two groups. Yes. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yes.
But okay, so there's the intimidation of voters at the polling stations are now mainly at the drop boxes because these guys literally, for example, in Arizona, open carry state, so they're armed. They go to the drop boxes in Hispanic neighborhoods and start asking people for their ID or proof of citizenship. And by the way, a law just got approved by a federal court.
Do they have to do that?
They don't. By the way, that is voter intimidation. So what you do is they have flying squads to try to get these people because they're intimidating people. They're not just asking for your ID. They've got a gun and they're asking for your ID. Okay. And
so why don't Democratic voting organizers in every state create a lineup of volunteers who will show up to each voting box, at least 2, maybe 3 people, maybe in 4-hour shifts, one of whom can also have an open carry weapon on display. One would be videotaping, and the other will be there welcoming the approaching voters.
Stop right there. Hang on. Don't bring a gun to a voting booth. Okay. Don't bring it to a drop box. And I'll tell you why. So there are groups. These are not the Democratic Party groups. this are voting rights groups like Hispanic groups like Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, and they have 50 flying squads of people to de-escalate these situations. The biggest problem we're running into, though, is not the people at the polling stations, but those who are putting in these challenges sometimes 10 days, 20 days, 4 days, 2 days before the voting, saying that this voter is not does not live at their registered address, or this voter is not a U.S. citizen, or this voter is dead. And these vigilante challenges, and by the way, I've gone through them. We go through them name by name. The vigilante who did carry a gun, he had a loaded gun on him when I was talking to him, who was challenging U.S. active duty soldiers, okay? And he was armed when he was talking to me. It was kind of dicey. But that's the big danger, is these mass new challenges by the thousands and thousands, literally hundreds of thousands per state, directed by this group, True the Vote, out of Texas, and some other groups working with them. So we want to avoid carrying guns. We want to avoid doing the same things that they do, because that's just going to create the mayhem that they would just love.
Yeah, amen. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Let me say out of the gate, you guys seem like extremely fine lads. I just want to say that up front.
Thank you.
Concerning the term radical, we really have to stop calling these radical right-wing guys conservative, because they're totally contrary terms. I mean, totally. And Doomsday Donald, I think, falls into that category. Concerning Medicare Advantage, I have a neighbor. I live in an apartment here in Spokane. This poor lady's lease came up for renewal about 4 months ago. She could not. She's on a walker. She's very disabled. Could not afford the increase in the rent, so she had to turn to Medicare Advantage because, of course, they're offering an allowance like any good parent might. And so she actually had to do that to make ends.
Yeah, that happens a lot. That happens a lot, and it's really a crime.
Yes, it does. It does. It's one thing also about a Catholic point of view. I don't know how hardcore the catechism of these guys is on the Supreme Court, but Catholics have a place called limbo, where the unchristened baby goes. They don't get to go to heaven, because that would just be too orderly or disorderly, whatever it might be. But just to let you know, they're thinking along the lines of a concept of the baby not being able to go to heaven and having that eternal salvation.
Strange stuff. James, thanks for the call. Thank you. Thoughts on any of that? Medicare Advantage being offered for free. That's it's a basic.
Well, what happens is a lot of these Medicare Advantage programs are giving away like goodies, like a little bit of like a free dental cleaning and stuff like that. So you think you got they give you some trinkets, or they might even bribe you by saying, okay, we're going to pay $100 towards your rent or something, whatever it is. So what they're doing is they're bribing people onto these things, but then they find out that they're not getting the medical coverage that they need, and that's kind of the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so whereas Medicare, everything's been covered. That I've just been on straight old Medicare,
Yeah, me too.
And but these new gimmicks, you think you're getting something. It's just like the bank that gives you a toaster and no interest rates in those old days. No thanks. Don't accept the bribes, because that ain't free.
Yeah. The problem is, Medicare itself can cost a couple $100 a month, depending on your income and all those kind of things. And a lot of these Medicare Advantage programs are free because they're going to make their money by screwing you. I mean, it's the bottom line. It's like
there's no such thing as a free medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. Sandy in Athens, Ohio. Hey, Sandy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. First, I'd like to thank you for a couple of decades ago introducing us to Bernie, because that was a great thing.
Oh, yeah. He changed America. He's going to go down in history, I'm telling you.
Amen. I'll take to my grave the knowledge that he would have defeated Trump.
Yeah, he would have
sure.
in 2016. Yeah, in my opinion.
What I wanted to talk to you today about was, as Ronald Reagan taught us, that perception is the reality. And every time I hear the Ukrainian issue mentioned in the news or in private conversations, the phrase that I hear is aid for Ukraine, aid for Ukraine. And I think if the Democrats would get on the stick and rephrase the issue, because it's not should we give Ukraine aid or not. The issue is, should we stand by our agreement of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum and fulfill our obligation, or should we just break our promise and say tough luck? But we guaranteed Ukraine that we would guarantee the security of their borders.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really important.
We really did, too.
Because, in fact, it was Thom who first sent me the copy of the Budapest Accord.
Yeah, they gave up their nukes in exchange.
And they gave up their nuclear weapons. Here, supposedly, and you even hear that, unfortunately, from people on the left, which surprised me, saying, there was a threat of having nuclear weapons, that we threatened Russia by expanding and bringing nuclear weapons close into Russia. Well, Ukraine had nuclear weapons, and they gave them up in return for our guarantee of their safety and Russia's guarantee.
They gave them to Russia, actually.
They gave them to Russia. Yeah. They gave their missiles to Russia, and they gave up their nuclear weapons. And what we had an obligation, as you say, in return to then defend Ukraine if they were ever invaded. Here we are. But I should also note, when we say aid to Ukraine, understand almost all the money that we so-called give to Ukraine is used to buy American weapons and supplies and goods. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just money for them to purchase. It's mostly things that they purchase from us. Right. And so we're not giving them aid. They are fighting our battle for us. They're giving up their blood. They only ask us for, the weapons to protect themselves. They're not asking us for our blood. They're just asking us to fulfill our obligations. Thank you so much for bringing this up.
And if we continue not to assist them, and Russia moves across Ukraine and into Poland, we will be giving up American blood in Europe. I mean, Article 5 of NATO, boom, we're in World War III. Not good. Not good. We'll be right back. 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Greg and me in just a moment. Check out Greg's website, gregpalast.com.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's talk media for the rest of us. We'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. John in Seattle. John, you are on the air. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to make two unrelated comments, if you would bear with me. The first of all, is you were saying you were agreeing with a caller yesterday on compulsory voting. I have a reason to really disagree with that, because I lived in Brazil when they were emerging from dictatorship. Mm-hmm. People had an incentive to vote. They hadn't been able to vote for 20 years. And yet they have just a huge rate of soiled ballots, people voting for Mickey Mouse, people wiping their, with posterior with a ballot, people, destroying their ballots. It's just a huge rate of that. So if people really don't want to vote.
Because there was compulsory voting.
Well, if they didn't have compulsory voting, you wouldn't have these uninformed people voting.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
And may I make another point, very important? Greg was talking a few minutes ago about some nonprofit organizations which are fighting voter suppression. Mm-hmm. I am retired. I'm 71, and that means that I have to withdraw a certain amount of money from my IRA every year. The IRS allows you to donate pre-tax money to nonprofit organizations. I wanted to urge people like myself who are retired, who have money in IRAs, who are forced to take money out anyway, if they don't need that to live on, that really, gives you like a 30% increase of the good it can do to the organizations you're...
right, because you're not paying taxes on it.
If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's investing in democracy.
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea. The gift of democracy, if you want to give a gift, that's a good one.
That's excellent.
Yeah, instead of donating my after-tax income to Biden or whatever, I'm going to donate my pre-tax IRA money
to
some of the organizations
That's great.
About.
John, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Happy Friday, Thom and Greg. Thanks for the special edition of Anything Goes Friday. Very cool. And thank you both for raising the alarm on this GOP war on voting. And, when it comes to fascism replacing democracy in America, not only can it happen here. The MAGA movement's working hard to make it happen here. So thank you guys for doing this. And as has been said, we need more public figures to call it out, not just Stacey Abrams. It'd be nice to see Al Gore, Barack Obama, and Hillary join Stacey in doing that. So, but finally, I think we're going to have to mobilize the youth vote as much or more than we did in 2020. And the Sunrise Movement's renewing its demand for President Biden to declare a climate emergency. And if he does that, he can impose a ban on crude oil exports, as you guys have talked about. And that theoretically would bring down or stabilize gas prices. So isn't good policy, isn't this a great example of good policy being good politics?
It seems like it would be almost impossible to put an export ban into place before the election, doesn't it?
Yeah, it will be.
Jeff, thanks. That was a great question.
Okay. I mean, there could be some export bans. The problem is we also have the issue that we've told our allies in Europe that you don't have to take that Russian oil or that Russian gas, and that we would liquefy our gas and send it to you. So
yeah,
we do
that's
need
natural gas. That's
we
not
do
oil.
need it for natural gas. We do need to support our allies in Europe.
Yeah.
The crude is a very different matter.
Yeah. Good question, Jeff. Thank you. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So when a political party embraces violence as a political tool, what is the end game? Where does this lead? How does this work out? How does this end? We've seen this in other countries historically. In fact, we tend to refer to them as fascist countries. We saw it in Germany and Spain and Italy in the 30s. We saw it in the 60s in Chile with Pinochet. It appears to be happening now here in America as well. We have Republican politicians calling for violence, calling for civil war, preaching violence and not to mention the former president, Donald Trump, basically begging for violence to defend him. And how does this work out? It tends not to work out well. And there's a whole piece laying out all the details of this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, What is the End Game for a Party of Violence? Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Liz in St. Augustine, Florida, right?
Yep.
Hey, Liz,
Thanks,
what's
Tom
up?
and Greg. Thank you. I need your input. So Speaker Pelosi, who I respect, was on Morning Joe Tuesday, and it was regarding several of the state's abortion access ballot measures. So she mentioned Florida on that and election integrity. Then Willie Geist followed up with asking her to expand on her Florida vote thoughts. Now, here are Speaker Pelosi's exact words. Oh, in Florida, I don't know. I think if you had all the money in the world, then go spend some in Florida. Otherwise, let's just win the election elsewhere. Now, my friends in Florida will not like that, ... Okay?
Yeah.
I am a volunteer. I am also helping as best I can other volunteers and leaders and canvassers. I can't process this, okay? If this is what she says on national airways, what does she say in private? It hurts volunteers. It certainly hurts voters. And guess what? Candidates, how about all the people who are working so hard to be elected? They're basically told, hey, no matter what happens in that August primary, the third week in Florida here, you're off the radar.
Did you get the sense that she did not know what has happened historically in Florida in terms of vote suppression?
Well, there could be that, but what I was focused on is the fact that she obviously doesn't know Rick Scott is absolutely beatable this time.
Uh-huh.
He has lost support, and 2018 was very tight for him.
Yeah.
Now, one final quick thing. She needs to apologize, and the best way she can do that, put her heart on it, is to sponsor an anti-Rick Scott billboard with a bullet list of all his horrors on a major roadway such as I-4. Thank you.
Thank you, including having committed as CEO of his hospital chain, the largest Medicare fraud in the history of America.
One thing we have to do. I understand what Speaker Pelosi was saying. Florida's gone red. That's BS. It's just like, the Democratic Party wrote off Georgia. Georgia was deep red. And Stacey Abrams said, no, it isn't. If you let us vote, we win. Biden won. They elected Ossoff and Warnock, two of the most liberal senators in the United States Senate, a Jewish man and a black man.
Out of Georgia.
Out of Democrats out of Georgia. The Democratic Party had written off that state, and the voting rights groups said, if we protect the vote and we get out there, we will win. So this is one thing to remember. And I was just in Texas. The Democratic Party had written off Texas, but now you have some great people saying, if we can beat vote suppression, we win. You know that the biggest black population in America is in Houston, Texas. So that is a blue state. This is Lyndon Johnson's state. This is Jim Hightower got elected statewide, don't forget. So writing off states is a very bad idea. I remember when Barack Obama was the first Democrat in a while to say we're running a 50-state campaign, and he took places like Indiana. Don't write off states. You fight for each position, and you got to fight for those down-ballot positions, because if you win those down-ballot positions, well, Rick Scott ain't exactly down-ballot. He's the monster raving loony party candidate to get reelected in the Senate. Yes, take them all on. And I'm not being partisan about it. I'm saying that you got to fight for votes and fight for voting rights in every state, because this is not a red nation. This is a nation that was built on progressive, social, the idea of a community that takes care of itself. That was what Tocqueville wrote about America. We take care of ourselves. We are the great progressive nation. Let's not forget it. And when people get the chance to vote, they vote right.
There you go. Greg, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. And Greg _Palast, by the way, on X.
There you go, and GregPalast.com. Hey, special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Dave Fulton, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jay LeBlanc, Al Gorilla Rhythm, Jeremy Peterson, Mark Thoman, Martha Salinas, Connor Arroyo, and Carne Verde, all the fine folks who work on this program. And thank you to you for being with us all this week. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy requires you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you Monday. Have a wonderful weekend.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.